Good evening, everyone. It's Mandy, and we're back with our TTC chat on Tuesdays. And today we have Brittany joining us. So thank you, Brittany. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me, and it's so nice to meet you.
So we like to jump right into it on our Tuesdays with kind of the question of, tell us a little bit about your fertility journey and kind of what connected you with Fertility Matters.
Sure, absolutely. So I think like a lot of us, I sort of ended up on this fertility journey unexpectedly. I met my husband when I was 27, although, I've known him the majority of my life. We went to school together when we were kids. So we went to the baby conversations quite quickly with that background. And after about a year of definitely not preventing anything, nothing had happened. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. And I was, so by the time I'm 28, I was like, maybe I'll talk to my doctor, just sort of mention it while I was over there for something else. And he was like, let's have a look at it. So I ended up going to the Victoria Fertility Clinic and was ultimately diagnosed with unexplained infertility, which I know so many of us have experienced and are still sort of battling, and is sort of, carries us through all of our years, without any necessary and like specific answers, which can be beyond frustrating. So I did, the full sort of examinations and all of that kind of stuff. And they were quite confident with the right sort of treatments that I would be able to, sort of have children, and let's see what happens. So I did the clomiphene. I did 3 rounds of that. And I actually got pregnant on my 3rd round with my daughter, and who is now 4. So that's very exciting. So then when she was about 1.5 years, we were like, okay, maybe we should think about this again if we wanted to have a sibling. So actually when I was 32, I ended up having my younger daughter. Clomiphene at that time was no longer available. And to my knowledge, it's not available in Canada anymore. So that was letrozole, different hormones. And it actually took 1.5 years to conceive, and it was 4 rounds. And we were actually just in the beginning stages of IUI, and exploring that and having conversations about IVF. And we were also actually looking at adoption. We really just had a broad scope of different options, and we're completely open to any of those. And we actually only went forward with the 4th round of treatment because we had actually purchased a lot of the medications and had all of the doctor's appointments set up for injections and treatments. So we were like, well, we're here, but we had kind of, moved on from that being, our success reality. So yeah, that is sort of what's led me to this point. We don't know if we are done or not. I don't think that we are, but we'll see what the future holds.
Thanks for sharing. That is quite the journey. And one I don't think that we've kind of talked about before. I can't imagine, my first thought is that you find a regimen that works for your daughter and then you go back and it's like, oh no, we can't do that anymore.
It was so stressful, and it literally sent me to pharmacies all the way in Vancouver, because they were like, oh, we have like 4 pills here and we have 7 pills there. And I remember for all of the rounds having to literally make my rounds to different pharmacies and different doctors' offices to, pick up what I thought was, my only chance. And I think that's what led us to being like, okay, we have this medication, this is so hard to come by. We need to just, forge ahead.
And so can you tell us a little bit about, were you on, injectables, or were they oral medication?
So I did just the oral clomiphene with my first, and then my second, it was a combination of hormone therapy.
So it was like a whole different kind of approach, eh?
It was, and it actually took from beginning of to the end, which a lot of us know, a cycle is not, a 30-day period. You have, your prep hormone, then you have, your cycle perhaps, and then you have, this hormone, that, like it's so many stages leading up to, which I'm very blessed and grateful. I know I was fortunate in when we were talking with Victoria Fertility Clinic after the third failed round with my second daughter, looking at IUI and looking at IVF, my story and my experience compared to so many is very minor. But at the same time, I think that a lot of the emotions are the same.
And I think everyone's journey is unique, but it doesn't, even the same journey, right, is going to be felt by two different people, and it's not comparable, right? Everyone's story is their own and their journey is their own. And regardless, like, you had to build your family in a different way than what I'm sure you had imagined when you first thought about building your family.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I always joke. I'm like, you spend, 25 or not 25 years, but like you spend a good 10 to 15, 20 years of your life trying to not get pregnant. Like that is the ultimate no thank you. And then you try and get pregnant and you're like, what? They don't teach you that.
You're like, joke's on me, I was infertile.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, do you know how much money I spent on birth control? My goodness.
Yeah, you spent money on these hormones to prevent pregnancy, and now you're searching down those ones to help you conceive. It does seem almost the time, right? Something that is that support is super crucial during this journey, as many of us know, right? It can make or break it, and it makes such a difference. Where was somewhere that you found support while you were going through this the first time and the second time?
I found support literally right here with FMC. It was one of the first organizations that I found that had resources and conversations and tools that would really sort of help you to navigate it. From, the support groups to just the information that you can find on the website. It was the first time in my life and my experience with fertility that I didn't feel like a black sheep, because I definitely, in the context of my family and all of my extended family, no one has experienced any fertility issues whatsoever. So I couldn't really turn to, even members of my family. Of course, they were supportive, absolutely. But they, had never experienced or had these conversations before. So FMC really helped me. I mean, just the 1 in 6 stories alone made me realize, like, oh, wow, this is a thing. So those really got me through a lot.
And we're seeing more, I find, in the media, like on shows like This Is Us, or even Grey's Anatomy, or throughout Facebook and Instagram. But it has been such a journey there, and still a journey to come, right? Like, it wasn't something where you see yourself or identify with it in kind of the modern day, everyday world. It's not something, like you said, we hear about.
No.
It's not something that, even if your family can't relate, you're like, oh, but I saw it on this, or I saw it that. Like, you are alone.
Yeah. And I definitely grew up. I mean, I grew up in a very small town. We have literally one stop. I was fortunate because Victoria is only a 2-hour drive from me. And they had the Victoria Fertility Clinic Without that, I would definitely have to travel to Vancouver, which is, added expense, added stress, all of those things. But for me, like, it wasn't even conversations that I had grown up even on the fringe of my experience. So I instantly just started reaching out and doing my research. I was very fortunate because I felt that it was a really collaborative experience between my husband and myself. We, talked it out. We were in it together. He was so supportive. He was there for me 1,000%. So, I didn't feel alone because, neither of us had any children prior. So we, were sort of navigating this foreign landscape, together with the help of our doctors. So, yeah.
And that's incredible to hear. I'm glad that you guys were able to navigate with each other's support, because it is such a crucial and trying time on everyone and our relationships. So what is something that you've learned about yourself or even each other throughout this journey?
I think that especially with, the unexplained infertility, I think that it's an ongoing process for me. I'm still trying to get answers, holistically through, Western medicine. And I still, even, 2 pregnancies later at 34 years old, they don't really seem, concerned about some of the other side effects that I have experienced. I mean, I've never in my life had a regular period. And for me, I'm like, okay, I have 2 daughters. That would be a concern of mine, and again, that goes along with a lot of the stigma that's attached to talking about all of this, talking about reproduction, talking about, periods and fertility, and, that entire conversation. I think we all work, especially here with FMC, to sort of end that stigma, but I feel like it's strong and it takes a lot of voices and a really long time.
For sure. And I feel like that is kind of one of the motivations too, right? To even equitable reproductive health and access to information and services, right? Like, how often is that even that conversation had of like, you're a girl, what does a healthy regular period look like? Painful cramps are not the norm. They feel like the norm, and you're told that that is just part of it, and you kind of suck it up and don't talk about it again. But no, it shouldn't hurt the way some of them hurt, right? Like, those are huge red flags. Yeah. A lot of concerning conditions.
Yeah, and I remember too, before my first daughter, having just a conversation with one of the, multitude of doctors that we saw, and her saying, well, you have PCOS. And then this same clinic, another doctor, 6 months later is like, oh no, you don't have PCOS. So I feel like it's just so challenging, somehow connecting all of the bits of information that we are able to collect. I think the biggest thing is just being very much your own self-advocate and going out and just, asking the questions, talking, to, your mom friends, your mom group, your families, and even online, like doing, what we're doing right now. I know I said to you before we started this, you can literally ask me anything. I will talk to everybody and their dog on the street, like, oh, okay, like about their journey and their experience, because it really is unifying for all of us. And I think that we've all, that have tried to build a family in an alternative way, for lack of better words, have a lot of knowledge to share. So,
and I think that's a really important factor that you made, right? Like, it can be very confusing. It doesn't all look textbook black and white, right? Like, it's not these cutoffs. Like, what if you are someone that, I would say, almost on the verge of PCOS, right? Like, you aren't ovulating, or you aren't this, or you have these symptoms, but you're missing one key Sure. I remember, like you said, at my clinic overreading and swearing I saw PCOS written down while I was going through my first IVF attempt at an egg retrieval, and then bringing it up 2 days later after I stewed over it. And they were like, oh no, I don't see anything PCOS, but you do have like the precursors for polycystic ovaries. I didn't even know that that was something completely different, right? Or that that was fairly common when they explained that to me and why my body didn't respond the way they had anticipated. But just by seeing a couple letters on a paper, I didn't even know that that was a thing.
Yeah. And it's funny because you begin these conversations, you know, with people in your family. And I learned through this journey, my mom had said, oh, I've had ovarian cysts my entire life and all of your aunts have them. Okay, you know what I mean? So you all of a sudden, but they would never talk about that. You know, you didn't talk about any of that kind of stuff. You know, you barely said sex, let alone, you know, why can't I get pregnant? You know, and like I had a ovarian cyst actually rupture at 18. And I remember the doctors, I was like, what is an ovarian cyst? And why would it rupture? And asking all these questions were very, you know, you're fine. Not just, it's not a big deal. Or saying, oh, I don't get my period. Isn't that strange? Or I'll get 2 periods a year. Isn't that strange? I'm being sort of, oh no, that can't be okay.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky to navigate. And I remember feeling that way too. Like while these conversations happen for us, we're finding out so much genetic history that we didn't realize as well because it's not technically diagnosed, right? Like even younger, my grandmother being like, oh, well, my cycles were like that and we didn't have medication. Like, because a common thing now that we kind of almost like look and go, oh my goodness, but almost every girl I feel like who is in our generation who had difficult cycles were put on the pill very young because it would regulate your cycle and help with those cramps. And right, I remember being, I think 14, 13. And then my grandma mentioning,
15,
oh, my cycles are like that. You just suck it up. And then like hindsight being like, oh, but that's not normal either. Like that is a huge precursor that.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's why it's so amazing that these conversations are happening. You know, and I'm for it.
Because even like, you know all of your family history, cancer and diabetes and anything through and through. And you get to that, I don't know about you, but the first couple times going through this and you get to that like gynecological history, and you're like, I don't know, I think there was a loss here and there. And then when you open it up, it's like, why don't we know that family history just as well as everything else?
Oh yeah, and it all comes out when you start having, you know, questions and bringing it to their attention. And I feel like that's why it doesn't, you know, building a tribe and building a group of women, you know, you're in Ottawa, I'm on Vancouver Island, and, you know, just having a conversation of similar and shared experiences, because we are so fortunate to be of this generation and to live in, you know, 2020, as ironic as that sounds, to be able to, you know, speak open and honestly about all of this. So
exactly, use our voice, because that's it, right? As much as it's heart-wrenching and working to build your family, like these are medical issues as well, right? Infertility is often a medical issue, and there's, like you said, there's many more effects to it on you as a person beyond just trying to build your family.
Yeah, it and we all know when you're walking through that, it is so all encompassing. You know, it's financially stressful, emotionally stressful, physically stressful, and you're gaining all of this knowledge and you're saying, you know, you're learning so much about your family, and you're also saying, okay, it's bringing up more questions than answers a lot of the time.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no doubt in anyone's mind that we would give our left leg for a child, right? But then at the end of the day, maybe we can speak to that, is there is still those lasting effects, right? These beautiful babies are born, but you're still looking at those financial bills and you're still looking at them, and you wouldn't have it any other way, but it doesn't erase all of that. That is still part of this journey that, like you said, is all encompassing and hits you from so many different angles.
Yeah. I mean, I always try and look on, you know, the positive side. I always say that I feel like I'm a better mother because I had to work so hard. I do say that openly, but at the same time, I feel like there is a little bit of a cloud, and I felt it going into my attempts for my second pregnancy. I feel that there is a
Sorry, Brittany, I'm not sure if you can hear me. You just froze for a second.
moving forward.
Okay, there we go. Perfect. Sorry, you just froze for a second. But no, and we've had,
Oh, sorry.
that's okay. And we've had people jump on here before and say that too. It's almost like the lasting trauma of infertility, right? It follows you. It's like waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm just so hungry for knowledge, especially having two daughters. And I remember when my second daughter, because I didn't know what I was having either time, was born, I remember in the back of my mind thinking to myself, oh, thank goodness, if one can't carry a child or has other issues, they can help each other. I remember thinking that. So that is definitely a unique experience, I think, for a lot of women when they do have daughters. That's probably not one of their first thoughts, and it was literally a thought in the OR for me.
And I think that your thirst for knowledge is admirable, right? You want those answers, and like you said, so you can help the future generation and just the women out there who might be uncomfortable to speak and ask those questions. And that's kind of why we're trying to raise our voices on this platform in a way that we can normalize it, because 1 in 6 isn't that abnormal. That's the reality, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I can't get pregnant on my own. I can't have the babies on my own. I need all the help that I can get. And I truly need to, and talk to anybody about it. And I really have no boundaries because I think they're so important.
And we really appreciate you using your voice, because that is so important. This question is kind of tough for some to answer, and that by any means is okay if you don't want to. We always like to say, not necessarily what you have done differently, but if you could change even your approach or something that you would approach in a different way, if you could go back, what would you do?
I think I would have felt braver. I would have told myself to be braver in some of those appointments. When I was getting an answer that maybe didn't sit right in my gut, or that I thought, I'm not really understanding, I would like a little bit more of an explanation, or could we try explaining it in a different way? I think I would tell myself to be braver. You're there seeking that knowledge. It might be, I know everywhere, a lot of almost every clinic, there's an expansive wait to get in, and you almost feel like rushed along sometimes. And I would say, no, like, you've waited a long time, ask all the questions. I always had, a page, 2 pages of questions that I had going in, when I was going through the journey to get pregnant. And I sometimes was a little bit intimidated, and sometimes I felt a little bit, overindulgent or self-indulgent, and almost like I was wasting some of the doctor's time. But I feel like I'm still asking those questions. I'm still trying to get answers. And I think I would definitely have, stood a little bit more in my own power and been a little braver.
I love that. And thanks for being vulnerable enough to share that. Knowledge is wealth, right? And knowledge is power. And we hear that. I think that's almost something we hear from every person we've chatted with, is you have to be your own advocate. And that knowledge allows you to kind of have that braveness and advocacy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, both times I was pregnant, I worked until days before I had my first daughter. And I actually went into labor on the first day of my maternity leave with my second daughter. She was a month early. So You can't plan. Like, you can't plan for anything, even when you have, a scheduled C-section. So I think I would have taken a little bit more time while I was pregnant to really enjoy that. I was not one of the people who loved the experience of actually being pregnant. That wasn't my favorite. They were polar opposite. And still, both times, just a means to get a baby for me. That was not great. But I still would have now, looking back, taken a little bit more time. But I think that speaks again to some of the financial pressures and stresses that you have when you've gone through these things. And we all know, I'm not sure what it looks like in other provinces, but maternity leave is not a glamorous amount by any stretch of the imagination. So I think, as mothers, we have a lot of expectation that is placed on us, but that we also sort of put on ourselves. And looking back, I would probably have taken a little bit more time to find the joys in that time of my life.
And thanks for sharing. That is something that you do hear, right? And again, it's back to that waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's like, when I get to 8 weeks, I'll feel better. When I get to 12 weeks, I'll feel better. When I get to the 20-week scan, I'll feel more comfortable. And then that anxiety with having that child. And I think it's really crucial that you mentioned that just because you struggled to build your family doesn't mean that you're going to love or have to love being pregnant, right? It doesn't mean that there's a correlation, and that's nothing that you're doing wrong or anyone's doing wrong if your pregnancy isn't as glamorized as you had imagined it was going to be.
Yeah, I remember people being like, "Oh, well, you've worked so hard to get here. Why aren't you happier?" And of course, I'm so happy. I loved my children. I was so filled with gratitude that I was able to get, pregnant and to carry successfully, 2 children. I'm incredibly blessed. But the actual ins and outs and daily process of going through that, it was neat.
And like you say, right, it was a means to get a baby. It was the baby that she wanted, so many earn for. And we work at building our families in different capacities. It looks different for everybody.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I would absolutely do it tenfold. I would do it again in a heartbeat. And every day I was grateful, so grateful to be able to do that, because I know so many suffer and aren't able to actually carry, their own children, biologically or otherwise. So by no means am I trying to be insensitive to that at all. For me, it was just, there are people that absolutely love every second of it, and I just wasn't one of those people.
And that's completely okay. If you were to come across someone today who is just starting their journey, like let's say is meeting with the fertility clinic next week that you met with, what would you share with them, a piece of advice or wisdom?
I think I would just say, sort of what I was speaking to before of just, don't be embarrassed, feel empowered, try not to feel any shame about it. It's totally outside of our control. It's most often than not something that we never imagined we would be faced with. And I think knowledge is power, Mandy, like you said. And I think if you want to be a mother, whatever that looks like, whatever road you go down, you will be. I believe that. I think that it looks different for everybody. And in my experience, the harder it was, the more I cherish it every day. And that, that was my experience. And, find people that, you can connect with and that you can talk to about it, if it's in your family or outside of your family. Sometimes just, having a good cry and saying the things that you don't think you should say make all the difference.
That is incredible advice. And thank you so much for sharing it. And I'm sure those following along and listening at home can definitely use it. I really appreciate that you joined us tonight. And thank you so much, Brittany. And it was great for having you on.
Oh, no problem, Andy. It was so.
Sorry, I think you just froze there again. So I just wanted to give you the chance to say goodbye again. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Bye, Mandy. It was so nice to chat with you. And I'm sure I'll be talking to you again. And I'm always here. So, yeah.
Thank you, Brittany. Have a great evening. We really appreciate it. And you were very brave for sharing your story tonight. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in at home. And you can see us next Tuesday. And again, don't forget to send us a message if you'd love to join us or be interested on our TTC chats. Thank you, Brittany.